At Unplugged they were?
Yeah. I've always had really good sales there. Where's the doc?
Hey everybody, welcome to At the Table with Tom and Eric, a show about the people who play games. And, oh, that's it. Sorry, there's no and there. I feel like there was an and there. I'm Tom Vassell.
I'm Eric Summer. There was never an and there. Our guest at the table today is the designer of Burgle Brothers, Walkstar, and the paperback games and more. He's also an accomplished bagpiper, which I'm very excited to learn all about. Please welcome Mr. Tim Fowers. Hello, Tim.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Folks, thanks for joining us on our podcast. Thanks, Tim, for showing up. Folks, if you have not backed our Kickstarter yet, hopefully there's still time if you're listening to this on a podcast, because it's closing this Friday at midnight, at 11:59 to be exact. Check out dicetowerkickstarter.com if you'd like to support us for another coming year. Many people already have. Join those wonderful people. But you're not here to be sold a pitch. You're here to listen to someone else talk about Kickstarter, or not. So let's get back to the show. Me and Eric just got back from the Dice Tower cruise. Eric is cold again. I'm not.
Yes, it was a bit of a transition from the warmth of Miami. I did get to walk around Miami for the day and really soak in the sun before heading back to the cold of Connecticut. But it's now snowing here, so yeah, I'm missing the warm weather at this point.
Yeah, I'm in Utah, so yeah, it hasn't been warm for a while.
Yeah, exactly.
He's talking years.
Yes.
No, it's both, right? It gets over 100 here. It's very dry, but it gets I don't know, it gets down to the 20s, kind of right now it's kind of sitting in the 20s, so it doesn't get hurt your face cold, but then it'll get pretty miserable in the summer. It'll get 100, but it's okay in the shade because it's not humid. So.
It's funny because when you say that in your face cold, I know exactly what you're talking about. I remember that cold.
Yeah, hurt your face, yeah.
Yes, I don't like hurt your face cold. Not a fan. So let's start with some geographical data. Tim, you mentioned you're in Utah now. Is that where you grew up?
Yeah, on and off between here and California. But I've moved quite a bit. I started my board game career in Kentucky, of all places. Like it's kind of all over.
Okay. What's your earliest looking back? Yeah.
Zoom in on this Kentucky thing. Where and why?
Yeah. So me and my buddy, we decided we were going to make indie video games, and we did. It's like you don't know what you don't know, and we decided to move both of our families to Kentucky, to Olive Hill, Kentucky, which is like middle of nowhere. It's outside Moorhead. It's just super green, beautiful, inexpensive to live, and we just decided to make a run of doing a video game development full time, and by a series of miracles, it kind of worked out. We did it for 3.5-4 years out there, But it was totally on a whim. We're just like, let's. I mean, I was in California at the time. He was in Utah. We'd been coworkers together, and he was just like, I feel like we should go to Kentucky. I'm like, okay. And like, we didn't have a runway. Like, we didn't know what we were doing. But in that process is when I started designing board games. That's where Walkstar came from. I was in Kentucky at the time.
That's when I think I met you for the first time, Tim.
Yeah. So I just drove up to Columbus to do Origins. Yeah.
And I remember that.
With your run of Walkstar. How many copies was that first run
100.
of Walkstar? 100 period.
Yep.
Wow.
Oh, man, if I had known that, I would have kept mine.
Right?
I have Walkstar 2 now.
Yes. So the before that, so basically my buddy was the programmer. I was the kind of did everything else guy. And so I ended up with a lot of extra time when he was coding stuff. And we were working on Now Boarding, which is, you go to nowboarding.us. It's also on Steam. It's the original video game that inspired the board game. But so I started doing board game stuff because, I mean, I kind of fell in love with game development, video games and board games at the same time. Like, I discovered Power Grid really did it for me. I mean, Settlers was cool, but Power Grid and Puerto Rico, I'm just like, this is elegant, and this is just like, it's doing so much with so little. And also the indie video game scene was blowing up at the time. And so for me, I was kind of diving into both. And so that's why I've continued to develop in both formats. It's just I had the bandwidth. And so we developed Walkstar. We went up to Protospiel, Michigan and Ann Arbor in 2009. And then Mayfair said, hey, we want to look at this. Please don't show it to anybody else. And we're like, okay, we didn't know what we're doing. And then they sat on it for 9 months and didn't even give us yes or a no. And I'm like, screw you guys. So I got all the parts assembled and assembled 100 copies of Walkstar out of my house and went to Origins, and then the ball started rolling. So.
And if I recall, so there was that you sold out at Origins, if I'm not
mistaken. Yeah. And then I was a little hesitant on Kickstarter, and so I just did like a pre-order, and I did 300 more copies through that, and then it kind of went into publisher hell for a while after that with Z-Man and then Game Salute, and it was a mess.
And that's around the time that I remember meeting you, where the game was all up in the air, because I remember talking about that. But at the time when you developed Walkstar, so right now there is, and I'm looking at these numbers, I'm pretty sure they're accurate, 927 million cooperative games. But when Walkstar came out, there wasn't nearly as many, and there was... It may have been one of the first real-time cooperative games.
Yeah. I mean, I was inspired by Space Alert, and Pandemic had just come out, and so it was a really new space.
Right, because Space Alert is not a cooperative game. Well, Space Alert, I guess never mind, it is cooperative.
No,
but
it's co-op.
Yeah.
Well, sort of. Yeah, I guess it is. You know what? It's a mess. I like Space Alert, but it's just random chaos. So did you have food background, which made you want to do a game about being in the kitchen?
Well, so it was originally themed. It was very much designed around Left 4 Dead. So it was, the co-op zombie type experience, and you were rolling dice and taking shots at these zombies and whatnot. We had this whole design, and my friend Tom, who's the programmer, he would get into cooking. Like, he would choose a genre of like cooking, and he had gotten into Chinese food. Like, he had a wok. And he was, into the whole thing. And he was just like, what if we just switched it up from being like zombies to like customers? And it was this like pivot. And we're like, oh yeah, this could work. And it was just like a lot lighter and more fun. But yeah, so that's where it went from there. And overall, I try to find, I kind of like contemporary themes more. I don't do a lot of fantasy or sci-fi. I kind of do the everyday or kind of the retro themes in my game. I don't know if I'll always do that, but that's just kind of where things landed. And I don't know. I was kind of inspired on the video game side by like your Big Fish games and a lot of these casual games where like Diner Dash and stuff, where you have something that's really contemporary, but you can make an interesting problem out of it without being just an economic euro per se, but just something that's comfortable, and there's a lot of that now. I mean, there's birds and cats and plants, and there's very comfortable themes now.
Yes.
Working in both software and tabletop at the same time, do you think you learned something from one space versus the other? Did
For
you
sure.
get some big lessons from the software space?
Yeah. I mean, there's a fundamental difference in. Sorry, my camera's shaking. It's the transparency, right? When you do a video game, there's this black box, and you're like trying different things, and you're trying to figure out what's going on inside. Like, what's the algorithm or whatever that's going on inside? Like, okay, this is jump, this is spit fireballs, whatever. But in a board game, everything is kind of upfront. Like, all the factors. Like, you know what all the cards could have. And so when a board game surprises you, it's more delightful because you're like, oh, you could use that card with that card, and it's about finding these kind of more emergent like combos and things like that. And so, I like even Burgle Bros was going to be like app assisted, and then we figured out a way to make the guard work because I was frustrated with like Forbidden Desert, like the storm would like get stuck in a corner, and you're like, well,
Yeah.
that's not fun. I mean, it helps us, but it's not like fun, And so having just like that waypoint system work out for Burgle Bros was like a pivot point where we're like, oh, okay, this could entirely be physical now. And there's been a couple of times where I go between or like, you take, tabletop sensibilities and bring it to digital. And then like, just like Vlaada Shovel brings a lot of video game sensibilities to board games. It's just, crossing that barrier a lot. I think you can get a lot. There's a lot of interesting designs there.
So on the production side of things, or just on the business end of things, so what made you pick Origins to go to begin with?
It was nearby, and I knew. I mean, I didn't know a ton about the industry, but I knew that it was fairly well attended. It was just kind of, that was the option. I mean, if I was in Utah, California, I'm not sure where I would go. I'd probably try to do it at Gen Con.
Sure. Well, at the time, Origins was a pretty hot place to go to. So you went there and you hooked up with publishers, and I'm not trying to find out any necessarily dirt on publishers. What I'd like to know is what made you decide to kind of do it on your own? What was there like a breaking point?
Well, just, you have these experiences with publishers, and, there's different types of approaches to design and whatnot. And for me, there's a whole string of circumstances, but basically I wanted a lifestyle business out of it. And if you ever watch Shark Tank, they don't like lifestyle businesses. They want something that can hockey stick and be this, big thing. But I've kept it really small. But publishers in the end, there's just, okay, distributors are kind of really the people driving the whole industry right now. Distributors like PSI and all the people underneath them, it's very much about velocity. They're like, okay, we need what's the next hit, and for them a premium is warehouse space. They don't want to store everybody's stuff, and so they want to kind of push everything forward. And to get distributors' attention, a lot of these publishers will kind of just sign a lot of things and might not have time to develop them or put them out underdeveloped or whatever, and they don't always aren't able to put the time or art or effort into your game, right? And in the end, I had some experiences where I got burnt by working with different publishers. And in the end, I'm just like, I'm just going to do this because I'll put the care that I want this design to have, and when it gets to market. And so in the end, I just, I kind of abandoned all that and just tried to make a sustainable model out of board games. But with distribution and margins and everything, it can be really hard. So the traditional thing is like, you're a small publisher, you get 1 or 2 games going, and then you're like, okay, I need to get attention of distributors. So you end up signing a lot of games because they're not going to pay attention to you until you have 5 or 6 games. And so you've got to, they end up kind of signing mediocre games because they're like, well, we need to get our catalog bigger to get in real distribution. And then they can kind of erode their own brand by that, having that rush. And just in general, like these days I hear like distribution has gotten so bad, it's like you have 3 weeks on store shelves before you're like, make it or break it. Like you're cut, right? It's so cutthroat. And I don't know, just a lot of that is very driven by these different forces of warehouse space and whatnot. So I don't know. I mean, so for me, direct sales and Kickstarter are much better. I can do games at a longer pace. I can put the time into them, and I found in the long term it pays off. Like if I can really put effort in and get it right, and I still mess stuff up, right? I mean, just look at the Burgle 2 box. Like I'm not doing everything perfect. But
you know what, though? I appreciate that you will actually say something like that, because I've met publishers who will never admit any flaws in their products ever.
No, I mean, that one is just like, I was trying some experience with Sabotage and with Burgle Bros. I'm like, let's innovate the boxes. And now I'm just like, you know what? We're going to keep the boxes simple and maybe just keep the innovation to the game. So, you know, when we talked about this years ago, you were told me very strong opinions on your thoughts on distribution in general. So as time has gone by, the industry is starting to prove you right in a sense that we're having a lot of other publishers. It's no longer a weird thing to have a publisher skip distribution and go straight to consumers. With Kickstarter, it's happening a lot with the bigger ones. Do you foresee this becoming a 50-50 split? Or do you think distribution is going to disappear after a while? What do you think? Well, I mean, there's a lot of factors, right? I mean, there's also just the elephant of Asmodee, right? Mm-hmm. And them squeezing distribution, so they could squeeze it on that end. There's Amazon that's going to eat all the lunch of all the online retailers, like your Cool Stuffs and whatnot. They're going to eventually come for them. And so there's forces at work, right? And I mean, these small publishers, you're like, oh, I made this really good margin selling on Kickstarter. Could I keep that going? But it's really hard unless you commit, because a lot of people are like, oh, I'd love those margins, but they're not. They're too, I don't want to say dependent, but accustomed to selling through distribution, and they're just like, okay, because until you really cut off those online retailers, you're not going to really get traffic on your own site. So I don't know. I mean, it takes commitment, because it takes a while for that to percolate. And for me, it's like I haven't really advertised my website. Like I really have just done word of mouth, but I just try to make stuff that's unique enough to be worth the trouble of finding me. But then once I finally got my stuff off of Amazon, then the traffic even came more, because, once Amazon is off the Google listing or the Google search, then it helps. But yeah, it takes some commitment. And I don't know that a lot of publishers have the stomach for it. Like, especially when they're used to like, oh, I'm just going to hand my whole print run over to PSI and they're just going to take care of it for me. And there's a lot of logistic crap I have to deal with, but like long term, I know it makes me more sustainable. And that I just want to be able to keep doing this. So that's the plan.
When you took control of your whole destiny and start up your own company, and you're just, I'm going to do all of this, what element of that whole process were you least prepared to handle?
I mean, just the worldwide fulfillment. First of all, I'm still tackling that and getting it in warehouses and whatnot. And I am starting to use distribution in other countries. After trying it for like 5 years, a lot of the people in those other countries didn't get the direct sales model. They just didn't get that they're going to get it from a local warehouse. Even though I've got it stored there, these people didn't get it. And so that's one thing that's like an experiment that failed. And so like now I'm either partnering with an online retailer in that country, or I'm just going into distribution in that country. But in the U.S., sticking with direct sales, it's going really good, really good. So, but what I wasn't ready for, I don't know. Yeah, I didn't know a lot. I got lucky the first time paperback got imported into the UK. I didn't have to pay VAT because all the boxes said paperback. There's not a VAT charge for novels.
For books. Oh, impressive. That's a neat.
Yeah. Cascade Games could probably get away with that with their whole line of book games.
Oh, yeah, that could work out pretty well.
Yeah. So on that note, when I first heard about Walkstar, that was, it was a nice new thing, and your company started out, but it was, in my opinion, paperback that put you on the map. Paperback got everyone talking
yeah.
about your company and saying, wow, this is something new. But it was a weird mashup. It's the kind of pitch that if someone had thrown it to me, I would have said, get out of town. Deck building word game, that's a stupid combination. Did you find it hard to pitch it at first because of that?
I mean, well, I was just pitching it on Kickstarter. So,
well, that's what I mean. You're trying to get people to get it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you should not watch that Kickstarter video. It's horrible audio on my back porch, and it's really, really bad. I mean, I was kind of lucky that I was early on. I think it is definitely harder to get traction on Kickstarter these days for smaller creators. But for me, there's like that 1,000 true fans theory of like you can make a sustainable business if you have like 1,000 true fans of what you make. And I got like 1,300 backers, and so I was like, it was like a watershed. I'm like, okay. And then I was still working at Amazon. So after our kind of indie video game thing didn't pan out, I mean, it kind of wound down. I ended up working at Amazon Game Studios in Southern California. And there was a day a 1 hour at work where they'd be like, it was like brainstorm sessions. And so I started to hijack these brainstorm sessions to bring in prototypes of Paperback and of Burgle Bros. And I was just doing it as this side hustle. So both of those were like side, I was trying to like get it going on the side. And but Paperback, yeah, I mean, it was very much like a peanut butter and chocolate. You're like, oh, these work. They shouldn't work. They're confusing in my mouth, but So, but Paperback and Burgle after it have been really evergreen. I'm trying to just not to mess them up. Like I just keep them in print. We're going to be doing a 10th anniversary edition of Paperback in late spring if I can get the Kickstarter together. But we got some fun little things we're going to add to it, and that's going to be the new like edition of, because we're out of stock right now. So I'm using that to like do a new version of Paperback. But I haven't really touched it in a while. I mean, we did hardback, but I mean, really those first two have been really, really consistent. The sales they just keep going. They're good for retailers, and so having an evergreen like that makes the whole lifestyle business work. So
another thing
Speaking of both paperback and hardback, or paperback, hardback, and Burgle Bros, there was a question that came in from Coralie about the size of the boxes for those games.
Yes.
And curious how you decided on the size of that, because they're very distinctive. They're sort of brick-sized boxes. And why you decided to go that way, and if it has been a boon or an issue for you moving forward.
So that was actually borrowed from a Mayfair game. No, sorry, Mayday. Seth Hyatt. He actually helped me out a ton at the beginning. He helped me find manufacturing, and he had this very specific box that they had done for that deck building zombie game, and I'm blanking on the name. But they had done that box, and they had done an angle on it, so it looked like an ammo container box. It was really clever. And what they'd figured out is that you could fit it in a flat rate envelope, so you could ship it flat rate.
Oh.
And that's why I stuck with it for the first couple, because I'm just like, oh. And I mean, with direct sales and stuff, like being hacky like that is like, you're optimizing for different things. And Burgle Bros, I should have not tried to fit it in that box, but I'm like, it can be done. And so
only you could fit it in, because once I opened it up, I couldn't get it back in.
That's true. I know. Yeah, it's hard to repack.
It's like those puzzles that you take apart and you're like, this isn't getting back together.
By the way, that game's called Eaten by Zombies.
Yeah. And so I mean, he was very generous. He's just like shared the dimensions of the box and everything. But I mean, if you're taking poker-sized cards, you can store a whole bunch in there. It's very space efficient for any card game. So yeah.
Now, it would be remiss to mention all these games and not bring up Ryan Goldsberry, because his art is almost ubiquitous in your games, to the point where I got another game with his artwork and I assumed you had published it. So how'd that come together?
Well, it goes way back. It was Ryan and I served a Mormon mission in Brazil together. in 97 to 99. And we weren't companions or anything, but we were in the same group. And so we'd been friends for years. So years later, it's like when you're indie, you're just kind of like poking your friends. You're like, hey, you want to work on a project together? And I'd have plenty of friends that would either fizzle out or not respond. And I was now boarding the video game. And Ryan, and I said, hey, Ryan, like an airport theme with some different characters and whatnot. And we wanted to use Catch Me If You Can, kind of that Saul Bass intro to Catch Me If You Can as kind of inspiration. And he came back like a week later with all these sketches. He's like, what about these? I'm like, you're really interested in this, And so
you're actually good.
And the type of people I work with have to be like self-motivated. Like, I'm not gonna bug you, if it works out, it works out. And like, he was very driven, he's just like, and so we developed the style with that video game that is now kind of propagated through all the games as our look for games. But yeah, he's been great. He's in Livermore. He's in California, and we've been working together since 08, 07, 08. And it's great. I mean, we've been, trying to mix up the style a little bit. We realized that we may be getting a little pigeonholed, so we're going to maybe try some other stylistic stuff. But I love working with him, and I just kind of leave him enough room to be like, I'm just like, I give him just some character descriptions for Burgle Bros, and he like made these like really iconic characters. I'm like, he just, I don't really art direct with him. I just kind of like, give him something broad, and he doesn't even do the thumbnail things. He's like, here you go. He usually does it in like one take. He's like, this is it. And I'm like, okay, we'll go with it, And he was a senior animator at Crystal Dynamics, so he did like 3 Tomb Raider games as an animator. He's done a lot of video game industry animation, but he's told me he's enjoyed, this stuff more, is doing this stuff. He did a children's book called Floater. He does he has, if you go to Bamboo Blimp, look that up on YouTube. They have a kids show. Him and his dad have this, and they do little animated songs and stuff, and they just try stuff, and they're having fun.
Cool. So one of the things you're sort of known for is approaching your designs and going after a second edition after a certain amount of time, and even iterating with a paperback system, hardback and paperback adventures, taking something that works and going back to the drawing board and attacking it again.
Yeah, and I mean maybe it's because I come from like software development, where it's just like, I want to be able to patch that, right? And I mean, Burgle 2, I literally did that with like, here's a way to play it with less luck, and actually it went really well. Sometimes it can be expensive to try to patch a board game. But I don't know. It's kind of hard to put down the brush kind of thing, where it's like I feel an obligation to the game and to the customers to kind of be the best version of the game. And so I usually don't come back for like a sequel or something until I have something really new to add. But if there's something that I think is really lacking, I try to do it as like a component or even like a variant on BGG. I've done it in a lot of different ways. And the thing is, like, what's funny is like Walkstar is the example where I shouldn't do that. Because like the original Walkstar is probably the best version for warts and all, and I've tried twice. I've published 2 other versions of it where I've tried to improve on it, and I don't, in the end, think it was better. It was just like, kind of like an artifact of its time, and part of being an artist, like you see all your flaws, and you're like, I got to fix those, and now you have to kind of be healthy with it. So I don't know. I do try to go back to them, especially when it's like maybe the market has changed and new games have come out and new sensibilities are out there, that could bring something to the game. We're doing some fun little things in paperback 10th anniversary. We're gonna do that. I mean, Burgle 2, we're just like, we did some experiments with Burgle and that like didn't work. Like we had like a man in the van. We had a player that isn't on the board but is like controlling the cameras and stuff. Didn't work at all. I mean, and just sometimes you have to figure out like how much to keep it the same and how much to innovate on your own design. And there's a balance there where it's like you want to bring in some new Tom Lehman actually gave me advice once. He's like, first expansion, give more of the same, and then the second and third, like then you can get into more innovative. And you saw it in like Race for the Galaxy. He didn't get like the war mechanics until like several.
He should have left those war mechanics alone. But yes.
Yeah.
So do you consider hardback a second edition of paperback?
No, so that was supposed to be an expansion. So I started collaborating. I have different people I collaborate with here locally, Jeff Krause, Jeff Beck, and Sky Larson. And we kind of they're not employees or anything. Like Jeff Beck has Uproarious Games. We have our own entities, but we like to collaborate. It's more like we're, musicians, and we're like, hey, let's make an album together type. That's the setup. So I went to Beck and I was like, hey, I've got all these ideas for an expansion for paperback, and he's like, whoop, and he threw them all out, and he's like, what about this? And I'm like, well, that's a whole new game. He's like, okay, so we made hardback, and like, and that's kind of been a sleeper hit. Like, it's really found its legs on BGA. Like, holy crap, that game, like, because Jeff's really good at like spreadsheeting a game. Like, he's really got all the cards worked out and really well balanced. And the high level play that's happening on BGA for hardback has just delighted us, because it's like they're playing at a level, like there's this whole latrines strategy. Like, you take your whole first word and take it all as ink, and then your second word you usually can spell the word latrines, and they get like a 9-letter word, make like 9 money, which will get you a really high level card. And we're like, oh, it doesn't break the game, but like it's a valid, there's a 120-page doc on BGG about like every single card and like all this high level strategy for hardback. And like at this point, you're assuming everyone is using a word solver. Like everyone's using the Scrabble word part, and there's still a game there. And like they're doing super aggressive things, and they're like, oh yeah, if it gets to round whatever, the game should be over or something went wrong. And you're like, oh, okay, we didn't, So it's just great when you can see, a game have hold up under that much scrutiny and high level play when there's like really kind of a competitive scene around it. So that's just a recent thing that me and Jeff were just delighted about.
I had never considered using a Scrabble dictionary playing turn-based paperback or hardback. That's a level of play I didn't even consider.
Is that legal? I mean, I would shoot someone down who tried to pull one out at the table.
Yeah, but I mean, I don't know. Like, it's I never really got too particular about like dictionary lookup stuff in paperback. I just said, either do what Scrabble does or do what you want, use whatever dictionary you want, and never really been an issue. But yeah, I mean, when you're playing competitively, and one of the reasons paperback works is because it takes these big moments from Scrabble where you're like, I found the perfect word, it's gonna use my whole tray, and like, and then there's like this deck building moment where like all of your powers are triggering at the same time, and when when things are going well in paperback, they happen at the same time, and you're like, I am a genius, and like it all clicks, and so we kind of get the payoffs from both of those at the same time.
We'd be remiss if we didn't talk about bagpiping.
Yeah,
indeed.
That's just a midlife crisis. That's just,
Okay, fine. So actually, you actually just started learning that recently?
Yeah. So, like 2017. So I was working on like now boarding and like hardback. Like that year, I started on the chanter. You start on the little recorder thing, and you just blow on it before you get into the whole like, iron lung, apparatus. It's a lot. But it's been great. Like I've just been finding ways to do it as a community service, and I always do it for people that want it. But I do birthdays and whatnot, funerals. But during COVID, actually, I went around a lot because I was plenty distant from people. So I had a whole thing like during COVID where I'm just like, hey, on Sundays nobody could go to church, so I'm like, hey, if you want me to come play hymns, because I knew a bunch of hymns, I'll come play in your neighborhood. And I went all over like the Wasatch Front here in Utah and played a ton. And just like I try not to ask any money for it, because I see all these people that get into piping. Either they get really competitive because they get in a band and they just want to like win prizes and whatnot.
Wait, there's competitive piping? This is a new world to me. I have not known about.
Oh, Highland Games. Oh yeah, there's a whole world. Like there's piping, pipe and drum bands. They're all over the U.S. And whenever you go to Highland Games, there's individual competitions where you can pipe on your own, and then there's band competitions. And there's even like 5 grades of bands. It's a whole world. But I saw a lot of people kind of like getting burnt out, and so I decided to approach the instrument as more like finding ways to do it for people, not trying to make money, not trying to be competitive. And it's really worked out. Like, so I do a lot of things in the community, like my kids' schools on St. Patrick's Day. I go and I play as all the kids are coming into school. I just find time, and then I've been doing it at PAX and whatnot at the end of PAX when everyone's clearing out.
You did it at Gen Con too.
What?
Didn't you do that at Gen Con too?
I had them at Gen Con. It's a hammer looking for a nail. It's like I'll use it whenever I can.
Well, some of our listeners want to know how you learned.
You just get a teacher, really. You do the chanter for like 6 to 9 months, because once you try to get the mechanics of like blowing the bag and squeezing and breathing and everything, you need some muscle memory, because you have like 2 brain cells left. Because literally you're hyperventilating when you play bagpipes. Like you're
not selling this.
You breathe all the way out, and then because your strongest breath is your first like 20%, and then you breathe again. And it's just like you're in this state of like. But the thing is, it's so encompassing. There's actually a style of bagpiping that has been an oral tradition where it's almost used in like a meditative way. And because like when you're playing bagpipes, it's so consuming. Like you're inside the music, and yet you're supposed to wear earplugs when you play bagpipes. But there's this thing I've recently discovered, a type of it's called pibroch, and it's not spelled like that because it's a Gaelic word, but it's kind of this almost like a mantra, where it's just like kind of this repetitive theme that you're repeating, and then you're iterating on it, and it is not nice to listen to, but to play is very zen. It is very like awesome. It's just like this whole like, and so I don't know, I've just found different uses for it, and I've slowly gotten better at it. I'm still a mediocre piper, but I don't embarrass easily, so I'm like, put my kilt on and go play for people. So
well, Jimmy wants to know where the safest place for a beginning bagpiper to practice.
I mean, you're gonna be on chanter for a while, but you go to parks. That's like when you have actual pipes and you need to practice. You can do it in your house, but it goes through all the walls. I can do it sometimes. My family puts up with it occasionally, but
do you struggle with the fact that there's like a there's almost like a when people make fun of instruments, bagpipes is one of them. It's like there's a bias
it's
against
redheaded
it.
Stepchild of it's I don't know. I mean, it has its moments, right? It's very much this kind of like acquired taste, and they say like no one's neutral on bagpipes. Once you once you kind of get what it's doing, and usually people don't get it until they see it at a funeral, and there's kind of that gravitas.
Yeah, because it plays Amazing Grace at every funeral on TV. Is always the bagpipes at a police funeral.
Yes, yeah. And there's even a tradition where like you play usually like Going Home or one of them, and at the end of the service, you play the pipes and you walk away, and that's the person moving on. And it's like it hits you, man. It's powerful. And so there's times that it really works, but I even when I play for people, I try to do it in like I try to keep it short, like 5 minutes or something, because all the tunes start to sound the same, and you just appreciate it more in small doses. So like I get it. I try not to like use it, play for a long time. So
where's the
specifically
bagpiping game?
Drove you to it?
Oh, sorry.
Go with Eric's first.
What drove you to the bagpipes? Did you look at the wall of instruments in the music store and say I could go with didgeridoo?
Maybe it was just like it was a study. They're talking about how like playing music really activates like both sides of your brain. So it kind of ended up being kind of like a challenge and kind of like a brain exercise, and it was just weird enough. Like I've kind of got I got to do quirky things, and it just kind of like it was weird enough. Like I didn't want to do the normal thing. I've always got to do my own version of whatever, and so it checked the boxes.
Okay.
But yeah, Bagpipe Hero. I should make the video game.
Bagpipe Hero, yes.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Special controller. Yeah.
Well, what about a board game?
Maybe. I'll think about it. I mean, there's the competitions and whatnot. You know, you could get into a whole management thing, and I don't know.
Well, before we jump to talking a little bit about board games, let me ask you about your newest thing here with Paperback Adventures. People don't know a lot about that. Tell us a little bit about it and what brought that around.
That was like a digital game that we did. It didn't work. Right? We were like, oh, let's make Slay the Spire a paperback, and you know, we mocked it up digitally. Me and Jeff Krause, he's the programmer, and then Sky was kind of hanging out at the office because I kind of had we had this office that was, you know, a house, and he'd come up once a week or whatever, and just he'd be working on his own designs and kind of hanging out with us. But he's a big word game fan, and so he's like, you mind if I take that concept and work on it? So he came back like months later, and he's just like, hey, here's just like this splaying system. And it was like, like attack versus, you know, it was magic. It was magic versus attack at that point, but we turned it to blocking. And again, it was very much like inspired by and driven by Slay the Spire, which is like, you know, it's a physical game that became a digital game, and now it's, you know, and now it's going back and forth. And I think every transition you gain something. And so Slay the Spire really showed, you know, this roguelike sensibilities with like how deck building has all these compounded choices, like all these cards you chose, you know. And Slay the Spire does so many things right that we really like that kind of journey that it puts you on. And so we wanted to, you know, do the paperback treatment, and Sky came up with some really clever new mechanics to add with like the splaying and whatnot, and it worked out. Like it's very much it's primary solo. We wanted to do it as a primarily solo game, and then you can there's some 2-player modes. Although one review recent was saying the best way to play it is just like co-pilot a single character, because there's so much to like think about in that game. Mm-hmm. And also word games, like you feel there's all this downtime with you know, people thinking of words. But when it's a solo, you got all the time you want, right? You know, and so we also felt like we could go more complex. Like I have a certain threshold with like a lot of my games are like a 2.0, 2 on BGG complexity, and this one we wanted to kind of stack it. We wanted to be like, okay, we want to give you a lot of ways to like solve the problem with the items and the MacGuffins and just these choices, and we just believed that we had a bigger budget when it came to complexity with this game, and so it's definitely my heaviest game. And I don't know, it's just, and there's some back and forth. There's some stuff we borrowed from Gloomhaven with like how your deck like falling apart as you play, so you really have that pressure to get the job done.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, we're launching the digital version next Monday of Paperback Adventures, and we had developed it to test the physical game, and also knowing that we would eventually release this. So that's going to be releasing on Steam in early access on Monday, the 30th.
Wow.
That's interesting. So it was started as digital, and now it's back to digital.
Yeah. And again, like every time, you know, you can leverage what one format does better, and I really like kind of bouncing between them. Yeah. So, and I mean, right now I've got like 4 digital projects in the works. Some are very much purely like they couldn't exist as a board game just because, you know. So I have different like people I've partnered with and being, you know, they're coding these different things, and who knows if any of those will survive. But I feel like right now I have more digital ideas than I do physical. So in the next year or two, I'm going to be doing more of that. But I mean, I've got Fugitive, Run, and Paperback 10th Anniversary all in pipe. But I don't know what's after that. We'll see.
This Paperback 10th Anniversary thing is making me feel old.
Yes. I lost the comment in the thread, but someone was asking about additional characters for Paperback Adventures and whether you have any of those coming up.
Yeah, we have a couple we've been thinking about already, because it's people are liking it. Like the reviews are really strong. The only pushback we've got is like the tokens were hard to fit in, so we're making a new set of tokens. It'll be like a free thing we'll give to people. Mm-hmm. But over that, like the reviews have been really strong. I mean, for some people, it's like, you know, it might not be your jam. I mean, word games are polarizing as it is, and solo games. But we're super happy with the critical response we've gotten on it. So we'll see where it goes. I mean, it's a solo, but yeah, we are looking at another, doing 2 or 3 more of these characters with their own like set of letters and whatnot, because it's the type of game that like the more you throw in, the more variety you're going to get in the roguelike nature of it. Like every journey is going to be unique because of it. So
Cool.
Well, speaking of that, let's talk about some games, because Eric doesn't like to talk about games.
Yeah.
He just played 100 billion of them.
I did. I played quite a few. We had fun on the cruise and pulling stuff off. I like being in proximity of the Dice Tower library. Tom just old hat because
it's right over there, baby.
All the time. It's right there, but I get to experience it and I got to pull off. I got to play one of the games that I had always wanted to try, but hadn't had a chance to do so, and that's the fashion game Pret-a-Porter from Ignacy Cevicek. I had never played any edition of the game, but the more recent graphical redesign is in the library, and got to try that for the first one. That is a dense game. Have you played that one, Tim?
No. I mean, I think it was a lost licensing opportunity with Zoolander, but
yes, yes. It's dense because you have to collect thread for your designs and collect those designs in the first place, and there's this time pressure that you only have a couple of rounds to get ready for the next season's show. So there's this constant, overwhelming, and plus you have to pay your people. It's not a feed your people, it's a pay your people mechanism. And the larger your organization, the more your outgo when you have to pay people every round. It's an intense game. I really enjoyed it, but it's a lot to think about. And really
I've seen it around. I haven't tried it. I'll give it a shot.
Yeah. How about you, Tim? What have you been playing lately?
I mean, I got into challengers.
This game is so divisive. I want to hear your thoughts on it.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, it's designed around auto battlers, which is one of the prototypes I'm working on. I got an auto battler but just so people know, an auto battler is, it's like I have an army or whatever. I'm setting it up, but then I have no control during the round, right? It's going to play itself. There's no choice involved, right? So it's kind of the coaching fantasy, and I think that I found that as I get older and I've seen other, especially men that maybe played sports, right? They coach Little League because they're it's maybe they don't physically can't do it, or maybe they want to leverage their experience and their knowledge about the choices about who they put in what position and whatnot. So I think auto battlers very much play into this fantasy of I'm going to set up all my choices ahead of time and see how it plays out. And there's definitely a high random factor. If you look at auto battlers, there's a high variability in how it can play out. But it tells a story. It can be a tug of war, which is I think what this is themed around. Or it's a capture the flag. But you have to buy into that conceit. And it's just, if you don't understand that going in, it can feel like why am I not able to control that? You want to be able to have some choice in there. You're like, no. It keeps the rounds fast, and the choice is just in a different place. So I think it's really clever. I love the artist as well, Jeff Harvey. He's a really talented guy. If I wasn't working with Ryan, I'd work with him on a game.
I just taught this to some people on the cruise. It's such a joy to play this game. And it gets a lot of garbage because once you build your deck, it's a deck building game, but then you just kind of watch your deck play someone else's. Someone pointed out it's not too different from Quacks of Quedlinburg. Because in Quacks of Quedlinburg, you build a bag and then you pull stuff out and see what happens. You can stop when you want, but that's really the only choice you have is stop.
Yeah. Yeah, so I'd love to see I think it's great. I love it's very much the Seven Wonders, high player count that doesn't increase the play time for the group, and it just has this very tournament feel. There's a final showdown between the last two people, and you kind of have to buy into it both, and also just so I heard reviews saying just if you just get excited and trash talk and whatnot in that game, you can have 10 times as much fun.
Yeah.
I don't know why I felt this was a two-player only game. Maybe isn't
it
there
goes
like
to
there is
8,
that tug
Eric.
of war? It goes to 8. So there was something about a tug of war track or it seemed like
you're paired off, right?
Okay.
You're paired off in pairs of 2. So you have, in an 8-player, or there's even some robots that fill in, but you've got, you're all paired up in 1-on-1 matchups, and then you play a round robin tournament.
Yeah, it's really fun.
Huh. I had sort of written it off as a two-player only game. I need to look at this a little closer.
Yeah. I mean, again, a digital game is very inspired by Auto Battlers. It's like it's following the formula in a lot of ways, brought over to digital, or to physical.
What else you got, Eric?
So I got to try the storytelling game Destinies, also from the library. This came out about a year or so ago, maybe closer to 2. It's another app-assisted game. You're using that to tell you what exploration tiles you're pulling out. You sort of start on one map tile, and it tells you what foggy tiles are next to it, and you can explore this landscape. And each character is given 2 secret goals on the back of their card that they don't tell anybody else. But it's also 2 possibilities for you to explore in order to win the game, complete your quest, fulfill your destiny. And you're talking to people, you're searching locations, you're exploring the map, and just having this adventure. And a clue that somebody else discovers can be exactly the information you need to help solve your issues. And so as such, it's not great if you really want to be the one to win. If you want to have complete control of your destiny, for lack of a better word, this is not necessarily the game for you, because somebody else might stumble into the perfect clue that's going to help them get a huge leg up on the competition. But if you treat it like a collaborative storytelling experience, I think it's fascinating. And really, really cool. I only got to play the first scenario. I think there's 5 in the base box, but I would like to do more. This really pushes my exploration buttons, and it's a really cool looking adventure. That's Destinies.
The first scenario is pretty good. The rest are fine after that, but it's the expansions that really bring it to life, because the expansions are a little more fantasy-esque. When I'm going to explore a world, exploring a medieval town where everyone's sick is not particularly fun. It's like you enter a hut. There's an old lady. She's sick. I'm like, well, that's fun. What else is there? Let's go to the next thing. You enter a hut. There's a man who is sick. I'm like, okay, you know what? How about something like a fairy?
Okay.
I'm just saying.
Well, I could see it like, because there's kind of these extremes where you've got like Tales of Arabian Nights, where it's kind of just like that you're in it for the story, right? There isn't, as much a victory condition. So having a structure of like, I'm trying to complete this thing. I mean, that's great. And then, I mean, Sleeping Gods did a lot in this space. Like I watched Ryan for years try to develop Sleeping Gods. Like originally it was like this grid, and like every single square had like some little story element to it, and you like would go look up what the story is for that square, and so you're slowly like unraveling all these pieces of this world. And then he got into like this keyword system and the whole map that he's got going, and I think he really moved things forward, like high, because it's tricky to have like have a strong narrative but then have enough player agency, and those are always going to fight against each other, and so finding ways for them to play nice is good design.
I almost felt this was similar to Betrayal at House on the Hill, but a much tighter system. It seemed to have, they had all the possibilities figured out, and not necessarily, well, if you happen to get the haunt and the map is like this, you're just good luck.
Yeah,
it's just gonna fall apart. But
weird,
this seemed to be more structured, a little more on rails, but as such, it felt like it all worked no matter what direction you were coming at a situation.
Interesting.
What else have you been playing, Tim?
The other one I listed was just Ready Set Bet, which is just great.
Because
it's like it's the AEG, the big horse racing game. It's like literally just a racing betting board, and it's like wits and wagers. It's like the fun of wagering is there, and the real magic is that like you can't really lose money.
I tell people it's a kind and gentle casino.
Right? Yeah. And that's what Ready Set Bet is just, just like the horse racing version. And then you get the app, and it has this like real time horse race, or you can have a person rolling in real time. And like it totally sells the fantasy. Like, you get into it, like you get people yelling at the app for their horse to move, or whatever. And again, like just like challengers, where it's just like a great experience. So like from like all my holiday get-togethers, I had everybody play that, and you can play with anybody. You're like, bet on what you want. Here's your tokens. Like, here's your chips. Bet on stuff. So
Now, are you the person who calls the numbers out?
There's one person who there's a way that you can kind of have standing bets as that player, but generally you're not. There's the person who's rolling the dice and moving the horses is not really playing the game, but it's kind of fun. It's like you're the MC. It's kind of a different kind of role.
That's the role Tom enjoys. I was going to ask how many times you taught this on the cruise this past week.
Only 5, actually. They were 5 great games, though. Have you played this yet, Eric?
Yes, I played it at the retreat.
That's right.
Last year.
I made everyone play it.
Yes, and I think you're planning on doing a live version at one of the conventions coming up soon, correct?
Dice Tower West tickets on sale now. So what we're planning to do at Dice Tower West, and this is not set in stone, but it's getting pretty close, is me and Eric are going to run it, and Eric didn't know this, but he is. And we're going to put a camera on one board of horses and then run 10 tables at the same time.
Oh, boy.
Everyone's racing off the same horses, and then the winners of those tables will get to go to the final table.
That's great.
That sounds and you had me doing the play-by-play, correct?
Yeah, you and I will do it together.
Yep.
I roll dice, call numbers, see what horses win. The app is nice, though. It's the kind of app you can cast it to a TV, and they have several voices on there. I think they're planning on adding more. So, Eric Summer, you're not voicing that on there yet?
No, not that I know of, unless they stole it somehow.
See, I'm never quite sure, Tim. You don't notice, but Eric lies to me sometimes about his involvement in apps. I'll be like, hey, there's this game coming with an app. Do you know anything about it? And Eric will be like, I don't know what we're talking about. And then later on, his voice is on the app, so he lied to me. And he's like, well, I wasn't allowed to say anything.
I'm not allowed to talk about it. But yes, the One Night Ultimate Werewolf app, Tom had no idea it was me.
That was years ago. I didn't know you as well.
Sure. We'd only been chatting every week.
When you're not looking for something sometimes, it can fool you, right?
Sure.
Michael Fox, the baseball guy?
Yeah.
He voiced some audio for me for one of the apps I made called Turning, because I wanted a fun British accent in there. And yeah, you can try it on our website. It's also free on the App Store because I don't know how to monetize things. But it's a fun chain reaction game, and when you get a long chain, he'll do a little line. So.
Oh, fun. Yeah, Michael's got a great voice, so that will be pleasant to listen to.
Well, speaking of this, Tim, you need to come play the bagpipes at Dice Tower West.
Maybe. I could get down there.
It's a hop, skip, and a jump away.
I know.
This isn't my idea. This is Chris's idea because he wants the casino people to wonder what's going on.
It would wake them up.
Maybe. Have you been in Vegas? There's very little that will surprise you.
That's true. They're pretty much in the zone, and it's very loud in the casino.
There is a piper that plays on the strip, and busks on the strip. So
that's who taught Tim. That's his teacher.
We wouldn't want to get into a turf war.
Right.
Yeah.
Those bagpipe fights get ugly.
Well, Tim, this has been fantastic chatting with you. If people want to know more about what you have coming up, what the next project is, just what you're up to, where do they go?
All my games are at Fowers.games, and you can even check out the digital stuff. There's links there. But at T Fowers for that's my Twitter. That's most of it. I mean, I'm kind of get around, and then you'll see me at random conventions. Come say hi.
And listen for the sound of the bagpipes and come running.
Yes.
Hopefully it's not a competitor. Alrighty, Tim. Well, thanks for joining us. And folks, thanks so much for watching and or listening. Until next time, I'm Tom Vassell.
And I'm Eric Summerer.
And we'll see you soon at the table.
Thank you for joining us today. We'll see you again in 2 weeks when our guest will be Helena Capel. At the Table is produced by Tom and me with assistance from Roy Kennedy, Wendy Yee, and Chris Yee. TV and internet service for townships in central Germany provided by Coax of Quedlinburg. And support for everything at the Dice Tower comes from viewers and listeners like you. Reach out to us on Facebook or Twitter or to Tom at Dicetower.com or Eric at Dicetower.com. Until we see you again, from all of us at the table,
have fun gaming.